Welcome out to session number 48. May the 21st, 2024. Seems like we've been talking about the Antichrist forever. And that's because we spent 3 sessions on 2 Thessalonians 2. And that's such an interesting chapter because it tells us what the subject is in verse 1. And then almost for the rest of the next 11 verses through verse 12, it's talking about the Antichrist. So evidently the Lord wanted Paul to teach this church that before that great event, which is 2 dual events at the same time, the coming of Christ and our gathering together to Him. And our gathering together to Him has 2 parts to it: a rapture of the living saints and a resurrection of the dead saints. And you put those 2 things together, and that is our gathering together to Him. But the Lord wanted Paul to teach them that before those 2 wonderful events can happen, there's going to be a time of darkness, of evil, of wickedness, deception. And it's described in Matthew 24 as increasing labor pains. Yeah, it's something that we men think we know about because we've observed it, but we've not experienced it, so we know very little about it. But those of you who've gone through travail and labor pains, you know the process. It increasingly becomes more frequent and more painful. And that's what's going to happen to the earth for 7 years, a 7-year-long travail because of this man of sin in verse 3. Some of you, like the New American Standard and some of the other translations, calls him the man of lawlessness. And then verse 7, the mystery of lawlessness. The Old King James and the New King James say the mystery of iniquity in verse 7, and the man of sin in verse 3. I wish they had decided to use the same English word in both verses. In other words, there's a man of iniquity or lawlessness or sin, and then there is a mystery of lawlessness or iniquity or sin. So I wish they'd use the same word in both places because it would help people better understand that it is a thing and it's a person. And they're both the same thing. This thing, this mystery of iniquity, has a face to it called the man of sin or iniquity or lawlessness. But it's also a system. It's a thing. It's what the Bible is going to call the mark of the beast, and that's a system that He's going to set up. He's going to be the head of it. So we had 3 sessions in 2 Thessalonians 2, and most of them focused on the Antichrist. So that's 3 sessions, and now I want to give this lesson, the first of 3 sessions going through Revelation, the mystery of iniquity in the book of Revelation. One of the best ways to look at the book of Revelation is it's the mystery of iniquity and the mystery of godliness working themselves out in a final build-up to a final clash. So all the way through Revelation, you have examples of how the mystery of iniquity what it will look like in the last 7 years. Because Paul said in 2:7 of 2 Thessalonians, it's already at work. It was already at work when Satan sinned, when Lucifer sinned in heaven, and it was already at work when Adam and Eve sinned, and it's been at work since then. But it's going to reach its climax in the last 7 years. We've talked about the last few sessions. God has designed the 2 events of verse 1 to not happen until iniquity reaches its fullest point, then he will be completely justified in wiping it out. So what will that look like for a mystery of iniquity to get to its worst? Well, we say it's at work today. I mean, the last few days we've seen the ICC over in the Netherlands, the International Criminal Court, whatever that is, trying to issue a decree for a warrant to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu and the defense minister Gallant for crimes of terrorism against the people of Gaza. This is an international court, and there's a few Hamas leaders on that list as well. So they're trying to say, see, we're not being anti-Semitic. We also have a few Hamas leaders on that list. But they're basically saying Israel and her leaders are equal to Hamas and her leaders. They both committed the same crimes, and they both deserve to be punished. So it's things like this that helps us understand or see better how Israel will be alone in the end. Because the other big thing that's happened the last few days is Israel has said that their latest battles in Rafah, the town next to Egypt, that like rats, the leaders of Hamas have all grouped down there to try to get away from Israel's army. So Israel has safely relocated 1 million people who are down there crowded in Rafah, the people of Gaza, who most of them support Hamas. They safely located them elsewhere and are helping to provide food and medical treatment and all sorts of things, hoping that with the citizens gone, they can find most of the leaders of Hamas. The problem is they also found dozens and dozens of tunnels in Rafah that go into Egypt so that they can run off into Egypt and hide, and Israel can't go into Egypt to get them. So Israel came out today and said, we are cutting back our plans in Rafah, limiting what we're going to do under pressure by the United States. And we're also going to agree to some sort of government in Gaza that the U.S. approves of. So who knows what kind of threats the U.S. made to them to force them to agree to this kind of thing. So they're going to have to stop short of their original goal because the U.S. says you look too mean to the rest of the world. So these two events together, to me, shows how Israel, at some point, will have to decide, we just don't care what the rest of the world thinks. I mean, we're being attacked, and we've got to take care of ourselves. So on our handout, I say, quote 2 Thessalonians 2:7, and it's a mystery. There are a number of mysteries in the New Testament, and it remains a mystery to most people in the world. But the mysteries that the Bible talks about are said to be revealed. So mysteries are intended to be revealed by the Spirit through the Word of God. And so the mystery of iniquity, being one of those mysteries, is revealed in the Bible. We're going to try to look how it's revealed. One interesting word study in 2 Thessalonians 2:7, the word work, the mystery of iniquity is already at work. And then in 2:9, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan. So those two words, work and working, are from the Greek word energia, which we get our word energy from. And I like that idea because the mystery of iniquity is energized and directed by Satan. So he's the energy behind it. Most of the sessions we've had, 48 of them now, have had this underlying theme of the ancient and ongoing conflict between good and evil, called in the Bible the mystery of godliness for the good, of course, 1 Timothy 3:16, and the evil is the mystery of iniquity in our text verse. They are two opposing forces in deep conflict. This conflict is introduced in Genesis 3:15 that we've quoted and looked at so often in these sessions. I will put enmity between you, which is Satan, and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He, Christ, Galatians 3:16 calls him the seed, shall bruise or crush your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So this ongoing conflict has been since that time. It will reach its final and major clash at the end of these 7 years. And as I say in the next paragraph, it's both a system and a person. So he will be the consummate expression of Adam's fallen nature. How far has mankind fallen because of sin? The Antichrist will give us an example of the extent of that. In 2:4, of course, that verse we've looked at quite a bit, he sits as God in the temple of God, as the God King. Antichrist then leaves after the abomination of desolation. He leaves, but he places an image of himself there. I do want to read Daniel 11:31. It's interesting the different places that the abomination of desolation is described. Yet here in 11:31, it says, and forces shall be mustered by him, by the Antichrist. And they shall defile the sanctuary fortress, that's the temple area of Jerusalem. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. So it's going to be placed because it's an image. It's an actual image that you can see. So it's going to be placed there as a, not a substitute, an imitation is what is the word I'm wanting to use, of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was the symbolic item of the presence of God in the temple. So he's going to try to imitate that with this image. And all along the way, we're going to see the Antichrist and Satan trying to duplicate or imitate the things of Christ. So this verse says it's placed. Matthew 24:15 says, when you see him sit in the temple, Mark's version of that says, standing where he ought not. And then, of course, Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2:4 again says, sits. He sits in the temple, saying that he is God. Standing. So all these different words are trying to give an idea of a man, but not a man. This image. And I don't quite know what to make of it. We've talked about holograms, we've talked about different things it could be. But all these words describing him in the temple, committing the abomination of desolation, some words speak of him as a man, standing and sitting. Daniel speaks of him, of this image of it being placed. In Revelation 13 describes the false prophet hires people to make this image. So it's a man, but not a man. It's an image of the beast, but it's not the beast. And so that death and resurrection event he has in Revelation 13, some say he really does not come back to life. It only appears that he comes back to life in the form of this image. But I think in some way he will come back to life, whether it's real or not. It will look like he's come back to life, which is another imitation of Christ. He's going to have his own death and resurrection event, trying to copy Christ. So I say this is the abomination of desolation. The Ark of the Covenant was the presence of God. This image will be the same. So in this image, and when he, as a person, so like he goes in there, declares himself God, and then this image replaces him as a permanent fixture so that he can go out, he's human, so he can only be in one place at one time. So he can go out and do his other evil deeds. So in essence, the abomination of desolation is saying, I have replaced you. I am God. And there really is no God. And this happens in the middle of the week. And then for the last 3.5 years, God shows him how wrong he is. Wears him down with those trumpets and those bowls of wrath. Let's go back to 2 Thessalonians 2. I need to rush through this part quick so we can get to Revelation. That's the subject tonight, but this is a little bit groundwork. 2 Thessalonians 2 and 11. And for this reason, God will send them strong delusion that they shall believe the lie. Part of what causes the mystery of iniquity to reach its fullest state is God giving them over to a lie. What is that lie? The same lie that Lucifer, Satan, told Adam and Eve in the garden. You'll be like God. I mean, hasn't that always been what humans wanted? To be their own God? To be able to solve all their own problems? To be able to choose a path to take that honors them, and they don't need a higher power to get them there? That they're totally dependent only on themselves. They don't need God. And it was the same sin of Lucifer, wasn't it, in the beginning? I will be like the Most High. And so this is what he says in 2:4, isn't that the sin he commits, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And he's wanting to pass that idea onto other humans, that you can also be like God. So this is the lies that man says the solution is in himself, the ultimate humanism. So ask the question, what is the core essence of God? One of the core essences of God is that he can create life. And humans, ever since then, have been on a path of trying to create life. Of course, we, naturally with babies. But now we're at the point, aren't we, with medicine, science, and so forth, that we're on the verge of being able to create life. Not the way God designed, through a man and a woman. Now we're being told that men can have babies. Now we're being told, women can already have babies without having a husband or a man in her life. That's been around for a while now. And in Revelation 13 and 15, when it says, I just really like the wording of some of these verses in Revelation 13, 15. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast. What does that mean? Well, we're seeing it right now, aren't we? We're seeing with robotics and AI and all of that machines are becoming semi-human. We're not quite there yet. But evidently what will happen through this false prophet figure working for the beast is that giving breath means that you're giving it life. How that's going to manifest itself, I don't think we can hardly even imagine it right now. But it's going to be the ultimate example of his creative power. It's going to be godlike. An image, meaning like a machine of some type, in our thinking, becomes human. And the interesting thing is, as that happens, humans will become more like machines. AI is a new species. I was listening to a podcast today of high-level people, high-level knowledge of computer programming and so forth, and technology and where it's headed. And they said, isn't it interesting that 6 months ago, most of the leaders of the high-tech companies, when AI first really started becoming well-known, most of the leaders came out and said, this thing could be dangerous. We need to make some laws to restrict its use. Now, 6 months later, most of you received a notice a few days ago, Google search is completely revamped, and they said Google search is no longer Google search. We've incorporated AI into our Google searches. And all of the high-tech companies now, 6 months later, are embracing it totally. Because now that it's here, it can't be stopped. So we may as well figure out how we can use it for our own power and wealth. But even embracing it, they're saying we're really kind of afraid of it. Because we really don't know what to make of it. We don't know where it's headed. It's going to take on kind of a life of its own eventually. And we may not be able to stop it. So I say all that to say this. I think all of that is built into this, whatever this image of the beast is that he gives breath to. And that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship. I want to say a word about that word worship in that verse. The root word there for worship has the idea, not like worship like we think of, but it has more the idea of bowing down, submitting, I think is the idea behind it. It's not the idea of he wants to be worshiped like in a religious way so much. He wants people to submit to it. And that's the worship he seeks. And isn't it interesting that the word Islam means submission? Israel becoming a nation again is a huge proof of God's faithfulness to keep his promises, but like everything, the mystery of iniquity perverts the things of God, so their enemies see Israel gathered in one small location also as a good thing. They say we hate their nation, but I heard, the president of Iran just died in a helicopter crash. Some say it was murder or some type of assassination. Who knows? Who knows if it'll ever be found out? But a spokesman for Iran said recently, we're actually glad Israel became a nation. Now we don't have to go all over the world to kill the Jews that we want to kill. They're all over one place. It makes it easy. I mean, how do you kill millions of Jews around the world, which there's still a lot scattered around the world? There's about the same scattered around the world as who lives in Israel right now. It's about the same, I think. But now, trying to find them around the world now just takes one bomb in a small country like Israel to get the job done in a moment of time. And it appears that Iran seems like they want the honor, if that's what you would call it, but that's what they believe, of being the one to do it, even at a great cost to themselves. I heard this discussion of two supposed political experts the other day, and one was saying Iran or no country would be that stupid because they know if they did it, Israel would probably be able to strike back at them before they could accomplish it. Or the U.S. or other countries they'd become a pariah, and they'd probably, half of their people would be killed in some sort of retaliation. And the other guy said, so what? They don't care. Do the leaders of Iran care that half of their citizens would be killed if it meant wiping out Israel? I think it's a good trade-off. So that makes it real scary, because if they're willing to absorb a major blowback militarily, if they think they could accomplish destroying Israel, then maybe they would. I enjoy listening to Victor Davis Hanson. If you've ever not listened to him, I would recommend it. He's our neighbor right down below Fresno, but he's also a PhD professor at Stanford. Brilliant man and brilliant in history. And he has a quote he loves to repeat. He says, "The thin veneer of civilization can be shattered very quickly." And a lot of his speeches in history, he talks about the wars through history. And I watched one the other day that was really fascinating about different empires that would often, they wouldn't want to totally conquer their enemies because they needed slaves. Like the Roman Empire at one time, 25% of the entire population of the empire were slaves. I mean, they needed a lot of slaves. So, don't kill them, to capture them. Kill some, but capture most. But every once in a while, those empires, because of whatever reason, would go in and just totally wipe out the people. Man, woman, child, destroy the city, pour salt over it, or whatever they did. And it didn't make sense. So he said, this is built into human nature. And he says, it's been all through history. So don't be surprised, and he didn't mention the Great Tribulation. Don't be surprised if it happens again in our modern time. I mean, we have been reminded that more people were killed because of politics and war in the 20th century than any century in history. And we thought the 20th century is pretty modern. So human nature is human nature. And we want to destroy our enemies, and now we have better weapons to do it. Daniel 7:15. Okay. Then we'll get into Revelation. But I wanted to read what Daniel had to say about this man of iniquities, man of sins, man of lawlessness. In 7:15 of Daniel, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. So he was really beside himself. Why? Why was he so grieved at? You've got to go back to verse 8. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. So that picture just got stuck in his mind. So in verse 15, he's grieving about it, because he says in verse 19, then I wished to know the truth about the fourth beast. So that was really what he was interested in. It was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron, its nails of bronze, devoured broken pieces, trampled the residue with its feet. So a complete maniac, a wild man. Once he gets his power, anybody who tries to oppose him, he's going to try to destroy. The last 3.5 years especially are full of wars between him and other nations that are trying to get him to slow down and stop and not be so drastic, and he's just going to wreak vengeance on them. And the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up before which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth that spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them. Revelation 13:7 says the same thing, overcoming the saints. Until the Ancient of Days came, a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High. Time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the other kingdoms, which Rome wasn't, by the way. Rome wasn't that much different. So I think it's really when we're talking about the growth of Islam out from the Roman Empire and after the Roman Empire must be included in this. You shall devour the whole earth, trample it, break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from his kingdom. Another shall rise after them. He shall be different than the first ones, shall subdue 3 kings. So there's a lot of subduing, overthrowing, battles, power struggles. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, intend to change times and laws. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. So if you're still here and you're a saint, you're going to be given over to him. Sounds like a great time. So let's go to Revelation. One main way to look at the book of Revelation, it's the final phase of Genesis 3:15 being worked out. The seed of the serpent is bound up in the mystery of iniquity, and the seed of the woman is bound up in the mystery of godliness. They reach their ultimate clash, a showdown to the death in this book. So side by side for 6,000 years, and finally God's going to say, let's put an end to this. You do your best and I'll do my best. And guess who's going to come out on top? During the last 7 years, darkness will become exceedingly dark, but light will become exceedingly light. And that's not often spoken of, but we're going to deal with that next session, looking at the mystery of godliness in the book of Revelation. Only one will prevail. It will only look like the darkness has won. Then Christ comes. So in Revelation 11, it's really the first time. It takes us till the 11th chapter before it really starts focusing on this wicked one. And this is the two witnesses. And it says in verse 7, when they finish their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit will make war against them, overcome them, and kill them. And if you read the first part of the chapter, how powerful the two witnesses are. They're able to call fire down from heaven. They're able to kill people. They're able to do great miracles. They're going to be seemingly invincible. But the Antichrist is going to be able to kill them, but only when they finish their testimony. So even in this, God is in control. They are invincible until their job is done. And then when their job is done, God says, okay, John the Baptist, I'm going to let you get arrested and have your head cut off because your job's done. It's going to be that kind of thing. But until John the Baptist's job was done, they could not arrest him and cut his head off. Same thing with the two witnesses. Their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So this murder of the two witnesses is going to happen in Jerusalem, the same place where the abomination of desolation happens. Because he goes into the temple and declares himself to be God. So a lot of big, big things happen in Jerusalem. Okay, chapter 12. We've looked at this many times, so I'm not going to read through it for lack of time. But it is a beautiful, sweeping chapter covering so much historical and prophetic ground. It's a key chapter of both the mystery of iniquity and the mystery of godliness, working at the same time, headed on a collision course. But I did want to look at verse 12. This is when Satan is cast out. Michael throws him out of heaven. No longer is the accuser of the brethren of verse 10 has been cast out for good. Verse 12, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth. The heaven's happy, but the earth has some bad things ready to happen. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows he has a short time. And so I say that the wrath of Satan is often overlooked as being a major player in the tribulation. Most people, they think about all the events of tribulation, they think it's all coming from God, and it's his wrath, his judgment. No, a lot of it is. But there's the wrath of Satan being played out at the same time. And he's going to do as much damage as he can because he knows he has a short time. His attitude is, I'm going to do as much damage as I can because if my time is short, I want to take them all down with me. And the only hope he has is if he can destroy Israel and kill all the saints. Because if he can kill Israel and kill all the saints, he's going to overcome God's promise of perpetuity to Israel and the church. God promised them both, you'll be here till I come back. So if Satan can kill both those groups, he can make God a liar. God can't keep his promise, and therefore he's going to be more powerful than God. So that's why he goes after those two groups. That's his only chance. He almost succeeds in both, but God intervenes to keep his promise in perpetuity. So in 12:15, the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that's Israel, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. So his attempt is to destroy them. He does kill 2/3 of them. So he's well on his way to succeeding. But God intervenes in verse 16 and takes her in protection in the wilderness. And then at the end of verse 17, the dragon was enraged with the woman, but now she's protected. The remnant that's left is protected. So he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. That's the saints, because in 13:7, it was granted to him. Who granted it to him? Well, you say Satan granted it to the beast, but God allows it to make war with the saints and to overcome them. Chapter 13 is the main chapter dealing with this mystery of iniquity and the two faces of it, the beast and the false prophet. And I make an observation, you may want to comment afterwards. The beast from the sea in 13:1, and I got to thinking, why is one beast from the sea and then the false prophet in 13:11 is from the earth? Why the difference? And I think it's because the beast from the sea, the Antichrist. The idea of the sea, until cameras and submarines and things, for most of history, the sea was where things are that are unknown. You can't really see them. They're hidden. They're mysterious. And the Antichrist, according to Daniel especially, he's not really well known until he takes power. Remember, he rises from a small number of people, so he's like the leader of a small, insignificant country. He's not really famous on the world scene, so that rules out presidents and kings and rulers of major powers. It's kind of like he comes on the scene with all the answers, and people are saying, who is like the beast? It's almost like saying, who is this guy? We hardly even knew him before. I think that's the idea of the sea. Because then the false prophet comes out of the earth, which is open and visible. I think the false prophet figure will be someone well known. The Antichrist will be someone who was not well known. So that's my take on the sea and the earth, the land. There's creatures mentioned in the Old Testament. Leviathan is the sea creature, and Behemoth is the sea creature. So they're kind of like precursor ideas, this idea of land and sea. And if you look back in chapter 12:12, when Satan is cast down to the earth, notice what it says: woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea. So this idea of the earth and the sea, and then later the beast and the false prophet in these creatures in the Old Testament. So there's kind of this little running theme all through the Bible that culminates in these two figures. The Antichrist is the king figure. The false prophet is the priest prophet figure as an imitation. Here's another imitation of the government system of Old Testament Israel: king, priest, prophet. So these two men are going to cover those three offices as a kind of an imitation government system. Then in 1613 is the place where we find all three of what I call the unholy Trinity. 13, I saw three unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false prophet. And then in 1920, I talk about the false prophet is grouped together with the beast when they're thrown alive into hell. So lots of attempted imitations. Here I mentioned in Revelation 13, 3 and 14 is his death and resurrection event. So it looks like he overcomes Genesis 3:15 by coming back to life. Doing so, he's an imitation of Christ, dying and rising from the dead. Then the false prophet is kind of like the Holy Spirit figure. So if you look at 13:12, notice the wording here. He exercises all the authority of the first beast, but only in his presence. You see that? Only in his presence. There's something about the false prophet that he's powerful, but he's dependent. He's secondary or dependent on the beast. It's just interesting that it says in his presence. And then in verse 15, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So, like the Holy Spirit, he's directing attention to the beast. He's not directing attention to himself. He's causing people to worship, to submit to the political military figure. So he's more like maybe the spokesman, maybe he's very eloquent, maybe he's already well respected, somewhat famous, and people are willing to follow him. I like this paragraph next. Satan hates man, for man is the image of God. Thus, Satan entering a man, so it's kind of forced into the Antichrist and then controls him. It's kind of a judgment in itself. Satan uses a man to try and destroy mankind. Thus, there are two incarnations. The first one, Christ, becoming a man, will destroy the second one, this one. And then here's something I want you to think about. We try to fit the false prophet into, quote, Christendom, make him like the Pope or somebody like that. But more than likely, he might fit into an Islamic template, since his partner, the Antichrist, is probably Muslim also. You know, we're Western. We think of Western like, needs to be the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church and all that. But throughout prophecy, it's important to keep in mind, most of the time there is a Middle East region, in Jerusalem in particular, emphasis to most of prophecy. So you need to think in those terms. Not always worldwide. It will affect the world, but the focus is not the whole world as much as that area of the world. But I want to talk about this false prophet, and I'd like to hear some of your ideas. 13:12, the false prophet is more mysterious than the beast, since Revelation is the only place he is mentioned, while the Antichrist is all through the Bible. So these terms like in his presence that we read, he's dependent on the Antichrist. 13:14 says, he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast. So there's a real dependence on the beast for him to operate as he does. We're not really told the details, but the beast is not dependent on the false prophet, but the false prophet is dependent on the beast. So there's something there that we're not given the details about. And then 13:15, we read it, he was granted power. Maybe this is the false prophet was granted power. So probably by the Antichrist and Satan. Then we go down to 13:17, this mark of the beast, that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So people try to, name the Antichrist. He's going to have like a name, like Steve Howard or something, or whatever. Poor choice. Like we think of names, but name also means reputation or, more than just what your name is on your driver's license. And I think that's kind of what it's talking about, because 13:1, at the end of 13:1, on his head's a blasphemous name. So it's not necessarily a physical name like we think of it, but something a little different. In Daniel 11:37 and 38, we won't take time to turn over and read that, but that's the verse that says that he'll not regard the God of his fathers, and he'll have no desire of women. So a lot of Bible teachers say that when it says he has no desire for women, that he's going to be gay. I don't think really that's what it means. I mean, I guess it could. But again, this idea of trying to be an imitator of Christ. So Christ, like Christ, had no desire for women, meaning Christ did not need or desire to be with a woman or be married to a woman or have relations with a woman. I think this man of sin will be asexual in that sense. His total focus will be on power. And the idea of having a woman in his life and a family and kids and all that kind of stuff, family life, that's not even going to be part of his thinking. He's going to be the ultimate example of a fallen human being. And a fallen human being that extreme will not have the normal needs of life, of family, marriage, kids, and all that kind of stuff. That's just, he's too far down to even think about that. There's a particular term in Islam called shahada. I have it in quotes. And this core tenet of Islam has two parts. Number one, Allah as the true God and Muhammad as his priest. It is worn on their headbands and wristbands. So you always see these Islamics, they'll have a headband. It's not for sweat, even though it's hot in most of those countries. But they have the same thing on their wrist, the wristband, and it has Arabic written on both. And a lot of times you see it and say, what does that mean? Well, it's this, shahada. And so the words on it means Allah is the only true God, Muhammad is his prophet. But isn't it interesting that it's on their foreheads in next to their hand, like the mark of the beast describes? As you've listened to me through a number of these sessions, you know that I'm inching closer and closer to this Islamic central role in all of this. Because we grew up being told that the 10-nation confederation was Europe, and that the Pope was either the Antichrist or the false prophet. Because we're so Western thinking, it has to fit into that. But no, the Bible is more Middle East focused. So if you get that in your thinking, you're going to come to a realization of a lot of these prophecies that it's probably Islam, Islamic figures that are really being spoken of. In 13:18 of Revelation, it says, here is wisdom, let him who has understanding calculate or compute the number of the beast. I'm conjecturing maybe it's some sort of perfect number, perfect math calculation involved, like the golden ratio or pi or something that scientists and mathematics and intellectuals around the world will somehow be able to say, in this system that operates so efficiently, it's because he's captured this magical numerical equation that we've pondered about for centuries and haven't quite figured out. And he's going to be able to incorporate that perfect mathematic equation of some type into his system. I think there's something there that we normally don't think about. Then, of course, 666, the Trinity of a fallen man, short of number 7, God. So an evil Trinity, but 2 of the 3 at least are men, and even Satan's going to be incarnated into the Antichrist. So it's like this triple way of saying the 3 of them are attempting to be number 7 like God, but they're going to fall short. In the eyes of many people, including themselves, they're going to get close, like 6 is close to 7. But ultimately, they're not going to quite make it, and then number 7 is going to destroy it. You think of it that way. The Islamic world is being set up for total deception with their belief. I've been trying to study Islamic eschatology because they have an eschatology of their own, a whole system of how the end is going to work. And in their system, it's going to work. There's going to be a final caliphate. That's going to come about by a major war, that Israel is going to be defeated. Their great leader, their Messiah figure is going to, in their own writings, rule the world from Jerusalem. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that what Daniel says he's going to do? Rule the world from Jerusalem. But their eschatology is the same as ours, but a mirror image. We see the Antichrist as the evil figure and Christ as the good one coming to destroy him. They have a false Jesus coming back who will admit that he really did not rise again from the grave. And it's going to cause a majority of Christians, so-called Christians, to adopt Islam. So this whole mark of the beast, being able to buy or sell, part of the falling away and the apostasy might mean a large portion of the world, since he's the one in charge, has all the power, the weapons, the nations are united behind him, that a lot of people may convert to Islam. I've never considered that in the past, but the more I read Islamic eschatology and how it mirrors our beliefs. This is why in Revelation 19:19, when it says that 19:19, I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. Who in the world would be crazy enough to fight against Christ coming on the white horse? Well, if they believe he's an impostor and they believe that their Messiah figure, which we call the Antichrist, is the true Messiah, then naturally their attitude will be in this verse, we can beat him. We really believe we can beat him. I don't think they will see it as a lost cause, because their belief system also has a false Messiah figure just opposite in ours. So again, this great imitation through deception. Won't have time to look in detail at chapter 17 and 18, which is the judgment on Mystery Babylon. They're very interesting chapters. But the thing I want to bring out, chapter 17, is the brief, and I have it underlined because it is interesting. The brief, mysterious union of Antichrist. And then I put Islam because I think he will be Islam. I think his 10-nation confederation will be Islamic. So Islam is going to be ruling the day during these 7 years. Islam's going to be ruling. I think that's going to affect a lot of these prophecies. And then I conjecture, I don't know this, Mystery Babylon, I say, could it be Rome, meaning both East and West? You know, the Roman Catholic Church, the West, from Rome, and then all the Orthodox groups who were centered in Constantinople. And there's millions of those. And you put those two groups together, and then you have 1 billion plus Muslims around the world. So now you have almost 3 billion total in these groups. And if somehow the Pope or the Catholic religion and the Orthodox religions somehow at least give some sort of allegiance to the beast in his Islamic structure. And it's being attempted right now, isn't it, all the time? You see the Pope meeting with the Islamic leaders and they're trying to figure out a way to work together. Somehow if they can come together for a short time in kind of a marriage, a shaky marriage, but still a marriage. And I say it's shaky because it only lasts for a short while. It says in 1716 Even though the woman comes riding on the beast, it says in 17:16, and the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, so his confederation, which means his army, his military power, these will hate the harlot. But they were united for a short time. But now they hate the harlot, making her desolate and naked, shall eat her flesh, burn her with fire. So I call it a messy divorce, an ugly and violent divorce, because this mystery Babylon is kind of like his wife in arranged marriage, joining forces to defeat their common enemies and to try to rule the world. And so God uses evil against itself, as evil often does. Many times in history, evil parties come together for a short time for a common purpose. But then as time goes along, they're evil. So they can't stand each other. So then they turn on each other. And this is kind of what happens in chapter 17. The beast and the woman are in love for a while, and then they hate each other, and the beast prevails against her. God uses the beast to destroy her. And then chapter 18 is a further description of all this. And I think the key thought in chapter 18 is at the end of verse 13. Merchandise of the bodies and souls of men. Who has destroyed the bodies and souls of men more than Islam and perverted Christianity known as the Roman Church, East and West? They have destroyed the bodies and souls of more humans than almost anything you could think of. And this is the reason she is destroyed. So John is inspired to expose and explain the false bride, the bride of Satan, and how the political military rule of Antichrist turns on her in an ugly and violent divorce. Then John turns to the precious bride of Christ in chapter 19. So we go from Babylon to Jerusalem, or a tale of two cities. And a tale of two cities is a good way to describe the whole Bible. Babylon and all that it represents, Jerusalem and all that it represents. Jerusalem represents the mystery of godliness, even though she was wicked and evil at different times. But in election and prospect, and eventually she will be that holy city. So Jerusalem represents the mystery of godliness. Babylon represents the mystery of iniquity, capital cities of both. I give all these verses about the slaying of Antichrist. I'll let you read those on your own. But they're all pretty interesting. Some of them in Daniel. And then I quote 1 John 5:19. The whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. So that's right now. The mystery of iniquity is already at work. It seems dominant right now and will increase during the last 7 years. But then the sounding of the seventh trumpet, and everything changes from that moment onward. So our original text verse when we started these sessions is Habakkuk 3:3. Though it tarries, but I'm going to turn over because I think I may have gotten the wrong one. I don't like that, even though I read this over about 50 times, edited it every time. I almost always find mistakes. Yep, I knew I was wrong when I read it. It's 2:3. So change on your notes. Habakkuk 2:3. Our original text verse. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. So the mystery of iniquity will appear that it has overcome the promises of God, the blood of Jesus Christ, the work of the Bible, the Holy Spirit, the church, Israel, everything. And then heaven is open, and they see someone on a white horse. whose name is called the Word of God, and a sharp sword goes out of his mouth, and he destroys his enemies. And that's the end of the mystery of iniquity as we know it. Next session will be much more pleasant, the mystery of godliness through the book of Revelation. And so if you start thinking of Revelation that way, I think it will help you quite a bit. So we will stop this recording and open it up to